Imagine vanishing for 7 years, no letters, no witnesses, no trace, and when you return, you're not the same person anymore. That is exactly what happened to William Shakespeare, the man who wrote eternity. Disappeared first. History remembers kings and battles, but it often forgets the moments when legends disappear. For William Shakespeare, the years between 15 and 19 are a black hole. We know he was baptized. We know he married. We know he had children. And then silence, 7 years, no records, no letters, no plays, nothing but shadows. So what happened? Did he run from something or toward something? Let us rewind. In 15, William was a young husband and father. His wife, Anne Hathaway, was at home in Stratford with their 3 children, Susanna, and the twins, Hamnet and Judas. Money was tight. The Shakespeare family, as fortunes had started to crumble. His father, once respected in town, had fallen into debt and disgrace, and William, well, he had bigger dreams than a small-town life could hold. But one mistake changed everything. Legend says young Shakespeare trespassed on the lands of Sir Thomas Lust, a powerful nobleman. He may have hunted one of Lust's prized deer, a harmless prank, perhaps. But in those days, that was a serious crime, a scandal that could destroy a man's name. And so, one cold night, William packed his things and fled. He left behind his home, his family, his safety, and stepped into the unknown. That was the last Stratford saw of him for 7 years. Some say he joined a band of traveling actors, performing across England as rough roads and taverns. He learned how audiences breathed when they laughed, when they gasped, when they wept. That is where he found his rhythm, his voice, his stage. Others whisper he worked as a schoolteacher in the countryside, teaching Latin and drama by candlelight, a quieter life, but one filled with words, the kind that would later ignite the stage. But the boldest theory of all, that Shakespeare left England entirely, that he traveled to Italy, a land he would later describe with uncanny accuracy in Romeo and Juliet and The Merchant of Venice. He wrote about Verona, Venice, and Rome with a detail no Englishman of his time should be known. Did he walk those very streets? Did he stand on the same bridges where his lovers and heroes would later meet? We may never know, but when he returned to London, he was different. Picture the city then. London in the 19s, crowded, noisy, alive, thick with smoke, laughter, and plague. The theaters, the heart of the city, as pros, actors, poets, rogues, and dreamers all fighting for a piece of immortality. Into this chaos walked a man with nothing but words, and his words stopped people cold. He started small, fixing plays, acting, helping companies rewrite their scripts. But soon, those scripts began to sound like him, sharper, wiser, deeper. Plays like Henry V.I., Richard III, and the Comedy of Errors began to appear. Audiences didn't just watch them, they felt them, because in those 7 lost years, something inside him had shifted. He had seen pain, he had seen beauty, he had lived what he would one day write. There is a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood, leads unto fortune. Julius Caesar, that tide had come for Shakespeare, and he didn't waste it. His plays weren't just stories, they were experiences. They spoke to kings and beggars alike. They revealed the madness inside love, the pride inside power, and the loneliness inside every soul. Maybe that is what those 7 lost years gave him a perspective. He had walked among the forgotten, and he carried their voices into eternity. Even today, historians dig through old records, letters, and diaries, searching for a clue, a fragment, a name, a sign of where he went. but the silence remains unbroken. Maybe that's how Shakespeare wanted it. Maybe he wanted his life to be like his plays, filled with questions that never truly end, because mystery makes memories stronger. And perhaps he knew the less people knew of the man, the more they did worship the words. The truth we lot, the merchant of letters but we lit. Maybe the truth was never meant to be found. Maybe the man who gave voice to the world chose to erase his own. So when you read his words, imagine him, not in a grand hall, but wandering dusty roads, notebook in hand, listening to the heartbeat of the world, a man with no name, gathering voices, dreaming of eternity. And when he finally returned to London, he wasn't just William from Stratford anymore, he was Shakespeare, and his stage was the world. He arrived in London with nothing but words, no fortune, no name, no friends, and yet, within a few years, those very words would command kings. This is how William Shakespeare became the voice of an age. London, 1592, the heart of an empire, live with chaos, ambition, and the stench of smoke and dreams. Merchants shouted on the streets, horse hooves pounded against cobblestones, and the air pulsed with something new theater. And somewhere, in the noise of it all, a man named William Shakespeare walked the crowded streets, anonymous, carrying a worn quill and a restless mind. He was no nobleman, no scholar from Oxford or Cambridge. He had no title, no inherited wealth. He was a man who had fled Stratford with nothing but imagination, and somehow, he was about to rewrite history. London's theaters were wild then, raucous places filled with laughter, fights, and fleas. The Globe didn't even exist yet. The stage was a wooden platform, open to rain, surrounded by a crowd of thieves, beggars, and dreamers. But to Shakespeare, it was sacred ground. He began humbly repairing scripts, acting small roles, learning how to move an audience with a single line. He watched the greats, listened to their rhythm, studied the crowd. He learned when people held their breath, when they laughed, and when they wept. And soon, his own words began to find their way into the air. To thine own self be true, Hamlet. Those words, even back then, felt like a promise to himself. Shakespeare's first big moment came when he joined an acting company known as the Lord Chamberlain's Men. They performed for commoners, but their plays reached the ears of nobles. It wasn't till long before the Queen herself, Elizabeth I, heard his name. He wrote Henry VI, a history so alive that people thought the past had come back to life. He wrote Richard II, A Midsummer Night's Dream, The Merchant of Venice, each one sharper, more daring, more human. London began whispering his name, William Shakespeare, the country boy who could make kings tremble and fools weep. But success had a cost. The theaters were considered sinful by the church. The play was spreading again, and large gatherings were dangerous. When the playhouses shut down, many thought the theater was finished. But not him. He turned to poetry and sonnets that spoke to love, betrayal, time, and mortality, and in them, he left pieces of his soul. Shall I compare thee to a summer's day? Thou art more lovely and more temperate. He wasn't just writing for fame. He was writing to survive. Every verse was bread, every play a roof, every line a breath. And just when London began to despair, the theaters reopened, and with them rose a new stage, the Globe Theatre, a circular wooden wonder by the River Thames. It would become Shakespeare's temple and his kingdom. Imagine it, a hot summer evening, the crowd pressing in, the smell of sweat, ale, and excitement. The curtain rises, and a new world begins. That's how he conquered London, not with war or money, but with words. There is nothing either good or bad, but thinking makes it so. Hamlet Shakespeare had become more than a playwright. He was a mirror held up to the soul of humanity, and the world had just begun to see its reflection. They call him the master of love, the poet who could weave human emotion into words so perfect it feels divine. But here as the truth did Dante tell you, behind that genius, behind the romance and the poetry, lived the man haunted by what love gave and what it took away. For all his fame, William Shakespeare was a man of quiet shadows. He spoke little of himself, almost as if he wanted his life to vanish behind his words. He left behind no diaries, no letters of longing, no confessions of the heart, just plays and sonnets that bled emotion too deep to belong entirely to fiction. When he wrote about love, it wasn't a fantasy, it was memory, a memory of something beautiful and broken. Imagine him, 18 years old, a boy with ink-stained fingers and restless eyes, standing at the altar in a small church in Stratford-upon-Avon. Across from him stood Anne Hathaway, not the actress you know, but a woman of 26, wise, steady, already expecting his child. It wasn't a grand romance, it was a hurried marriage, a quiet beginning for a man who would later make the whole world weep for love. They had 3 children, Susanna, and twins, Hamnet and Judas. But life was never still for Shakespeare. While Anne stayed in Stratford, raising their children, tending the home he left behind, William's hunger for something greater put him away. London, loud, crowded, alive, became his stage and his second home, and stayed behind in silence. Maybe she understood that his love belonged not to her alone, but to every word he wrote, every play that carried his name. Love looks not with the eyes, but with the mind. A midsummer night as dream. Was that love or regret speaking through him? He wrote of lovers torn apart by chance, of passion and betrayal, of devotion and despair, perhaps because that was the love he knew, one that lived between the lines, stretched across distance, divided by time. But then, tragedy struck. The plague had come and gone like a thief, leaving death in its shadow, and among its victims was his only son, Hamnet, just 11 years old. The boy who bore his name was gone, and something inside Shakespeare broke. No one recorded his grief, no letters, no words. But years later, he wrote Hamlet, a story of a son who cannot stop mourning his father. Or maybe, a father mourning his son. Hamnet, Hamlet, one letter apart, and a lifetime of sorrow between. Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak knits up the overwrought heart and bids it break. Macbeth, maybe that was his confession. Maybe the stage became his confessional, his way of saying what his heart could not. After Hamnet's death, his writing changed. Gone was the light-hearted laughter of early comedies. In its place came something darker, something human and raw. Romeo and Juliet, Othello, Macbeth, kingly, each play dripping with longing, betrayal, and the ache of loss. Every fall, every death, every broken heart, it all felt too personal, too close, as if each page had been written with tears instead of ink. Yet through it all, he kept writing, because maybe that is what writing really is. The art of taking pain and turning it into something eternal, to bleed privately but heal publicly. He turned grief into poetry, loss into immortality, and the world, unknowingly, became the witness to his healing. When I do count the clock that tells the time, and see the brave day sunk in hideous night, sounded sure in those words, you can almost feel him watching time pass, aware that life and love are fleeting. And yet, for all his understanding of sorrow, Shakespeare never stopped believing in love as beauty. Even when he wrote of jealousy, of lovers torn apart by fate, of fools dying for desire, his words still shimmered with a strange hope. He knew that love was flawed, that it wounded, betrayed, and destroyed, but he also knew it was the only thing that made life worth living. The course of true love never did run smooth a midsummer night as dream. He didn't mean that as cynicism, he meant it as truth. Love isn't meant to be easy, it is meant to transform. Years later, when success had filled his name with glory, Shakespeare returned home to Stratford. The man who had written for kings and queens came back to quiet fields and cobblestone streets. He bought a large house, no place, and tried to live as a gentleman, a father, a husband again. But time changes all things, and was still there, while but distant. The children grown, and the world that once adored him was far away. He had lived a life of worth, yet that surrounded by silence. But even that, 4 centuries later, people still ask, did Shakespeare even exist? Or was he a mask worn by someone powerful, hiding behind a poor man's name? It is the greatest mystery in literature, a question whispered through classrooms, echoed in libraries, and debated in candlelit studies. Could a simple man from Stratford-upon-Avon, a man with no royal blood, no record of higher learning, no evidence of ever living in England, truly have written the words that reshaped the world? His plays speak of cars and kings, of Italian balconies and Roman senators, of oceans and empires. His words move through the halls of power as if he had walked there himself. So how could a glove-maker's son know so much about the world of rulers and rebels? That question has never gone away. Over the centuries, theories have multiplied like shadows stretching at dusk. Some say the real author was Sir Francis Bacon, philosopher and statesman, who hid his genius behind the mask of a common actor. Others insist it was Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare as rebel, a man officially declared dead after a tavern brawl, but perhaps alive, writing in secret exile. And then there is the most romantic theory of all, Edward de Vere, the Earl of Oxford, a nobleman too proud to set plays meant for the public stage. Each theory comes with letters, codes, and conspiracies, hints carved into old texts, initials buried in sonnets, coincidences that feel almost supernatural. It is a treasure hunt across 4 centuries, each clue leading to another question. But the mystery isn't just about authorship, it is about belief. People don't doubt Shakespeare because of facts alone. They doubt because his talent feels too big, too impossible. How could any single human being write with such insight into love, jealousy, politics, betrayal, and the fragile machinery of the human soul? To understand the man, we must go back to where he came from. William Shakespeare was born in Ewood in Stratford-upon-Avon, a small market town. His father, John Shakespeare, sold gloves. His mother, Mary Arden, came from a farming family. He likely attended the local grammar school, studied Latin, read the classics, and then disappeared from the record for 7 long years. No one knows where he went or what he did, and when he finally reappears, it is as a playwright whose words outshine every scholar, every poet, every courtly wit in London. How? Some say he must have been educated in secret, mentored by nobles. Others believe he traveled with actors, learned the world by living it, in taverns, in markets, among sailors and soldiers, that his education wasn't in books, but in people. Because listen closely to his words, and you'll hear something more than knowledge. You'll hear life. He writes not as a historian, but as a witness. His kings are not marble statues. They doubt, they bleed, they dream. His lovers are not distant ideals. They stumble, they ache, they burn with all the messy glory of being human. What a piece of work is man! How noble in reason! How infinite in faculty! Hamlet, those lines don't come from a textbook. They come from someone who has lived among both greatness and grief. Maybe that is why some scholars say the question itself misses the point. It doesn't matter whether he was Shakespeare the actor, Bacon the philosopher, or De Vere the earl. Whoever wrote those plays understood the heartbeat of humanity, and that heartbeat doesn't lie, because every word he wrote carries fingerprints of the human soul. Whether he was a farmer as son or a secret lord, he gave the world something that no fraud could ever create: truth. The truth we loved. The urchin of Venice think about that line. Maybe it was a confession. Maybe the man behind the name was speaking directly to us, saying that it doesn't matter what mask he wore, the truth would survive. Still, the mystery endures. In the centuries since his death, countless experts have searched for answers, hidden signatures in the margins, cipher messages between lines, secret codes in the first folio. Every generation adds another layer to the legend. Every discovery opens another door. There are even those who claim that the plays were written by a group of writers, all hiding behind a single name for safety, because in Elizabethan England, wars could be dangerous, plays could criticize power, challenge the crown, spark rebellion. A single name, William Shakespeare, could be the perfect disguise. Yet, despite all the arguments, one truth stands tall: the works exist, and they feel alive. When you hear Macbeth whisper about ambition, when Juliet calls out into the night, when King Lear rages against the storm, you don't feel a mystery. You feel recognition. You feel that whoever wrote those words understood what it means to be human. Maybe Shakespeare was not one man but many. Maybe he was a dream shared by minds too brilliant to exist alone. Or maybe, just maybe, he was exactly who history says he was: a man from a small town, armed with language and longing, who reached for immortality and caught it. That possibility is, in its own way, the most miraculous of all, because if a glovemaker's son could become the voice of the ages, then perhaps greatness isn't born in palaces. Perhaps it is born in ordinary hearts, in anyone who dares to dream, to write, to feel. So the question remains: who was William Shakespeare? A front, a fraud, or a genius beyond comprehension? We need never know. And maybe that is exactly how he wanted it, because as long as we keep asking, he stays alive. As long as the mystery endures, the curtain never fully falls. And perhaps that is the final joke of the world's greatest playwright, that even in death, he still controls the story. Life is but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage and then is heard no more. Macbeth. Yet 4 centuries later, we read, still listening, still questioning, still watching the shadow he cast, and wondering who truly stood in its light. In 1666, the curtain fell, but 4 centuries later, the applause still hasn't stopped. This is how William Shakespeare defeated time itself. In 1616, William Shakespeare died at the age of 52, a quiet and for a man who wrote such thunder. No fanfare, no farewell performance, no cross lining the streets, just a man returning to Stratford-upon-Avon, to the same river where he had once dreamed of more. They say he died on his birthday, April 30, as if the universe had chosen perfect symmetry. The day that gave him to the world also took him back. His body was laid to rest in the chancel of Holy Trinity Church, under a simple stone slab. And on that slab, carved by his own design, a warning, a part poem, part curse: good friend, for Jesus' sake forbear to dig the dust enclosed here. Blessed be the man that spares these stones. and cursed be he that moves my bones. No one has ever dared to test it. For 4 centuries, his bones have rested untouched or protected by fear, faith, or perhaps respect. But even as his grave fell silent, his voice did not, because long before death came for his body, Shakespeare had already made a deal with immortality. Cowards that many times before their deaths, the valiant never taste of death but once. Julius Caesar, perhaps he knew, perhaps he always knew that his words would outlive the man who wrote them. That ink, not blood, would carry his soul forward through time. Today, over 400 years later, Shakespeare still walks among us, not in flesh, but in language, in rhythm, in emotion. Every time someone falls in love, argues with fate, or wrestles with conscience, his words return to life. He exists in every actor who whispers his lines under a stage light, in every student who opens his plays for the first time, and in every heart that finds itself reflected in his verses. He wrote not just for kings and queens, but for all of us, for the dreamers, the broken, the passionate, the lost, for the humanity that stumbles and strives and loves anyway. We are such stuff as dreams are made on, and our little life is rounded with sleep. The Tempest, those weren't just words from a play. They were a confession, a poet admitting that life itself is a fragile illusion, a dream that vanishes the moment we wake. But if that is true, or if life is fleeting, then Shakespeare found the way to dream forever. He understood something most of us still chase, that death cannot touch what is written in truth, that stories are stronger than stone. For centuries later, the ink of his quill still bleeds through all culture. Modern films, books, and songs echo his ideals without even realizing it. Romeo and Juliet became ever a tale of forbidden love. Macbeth became the symbol of ambition gone too far. Hamlet, the eternal voice of doubt and conscience, his fingerprints are on every tragedy that has ever been told, every romance ever whispered. In a way, we've all been quoting Shakespeare our whole lives, even when we don't know it. Wild goose chase, break the ice, heart of gold, all that glitters is not gold. Common phrases born from his pen. He shaped not just stories, but the English language itself. And what does that say about the man? That maybe immortality isn't about living forever, and it is about being impossible to forget. When we think of Shakespeare now, we don't see the glovemaker as son, or the aging playwright from Stratford. We see the mirror he held up to us, the reflection of our own hearts. He told us that love could destroy, that power could corrupt, that madness could reveal truth, and that humor could heal pain. He gave words to the emotions that humans still fail to explain. Perhaps that is why he feels eternal, because what he wrote wasn't bound by his century, it was bound by humanity itself. When he wrote of betrayal, he was writing of us. When he wrote of love, he was writing for us. And when he wrote of death, he was teaching us how to face it.